And welcome back to the Thought Vessel. I'm Levi.
I'm Jacoby.
And I'm Joe.
And we have a breaking news. So this episode in particular is not going to take the place of our episode coming out next week. We just had some breaking news from Wizards of the Coast, so we were going to talk about it.
Yep, quick thoughts.
Specifically because Commander now has a bracket system that has been organized from 1 to 5, not the original 4 that they had, but that was an alpha.
We're getting a general premise. They didn't give us any information on what it was going to look like with the bracket system whenever Wizards of the Coast took over the Commander format from the Rules Committee. But now we have a beta version. So keeping in mind, as they have specified over and over, this is a beta. This is just getting the initial product out. They're going to get feedback from the community and then sending it back to us.
The specific brackets we have are 1, Exhibition, your ultra casual Commander deck. These are your no mass land denial or extra turns, no 2-card infinite combos, no game changers at all, and we'll get to those, and very few tutors.
This is the hyper casual. This game's going to run for a long time. Very silly stuff. Angry looking villains yelling. Everyone's in a chair, this kind of thing.
Number 2 on our list next is going to be the core list. It's the average current pre-constructed deck. Still no mass land denial, no chaining a bunch of extra turns. So instead of just none, it's just don't chain them. No 2-card infinites, no game changers, very few tutors.
And that's on an interesting thing here is it says no 2-card infinite combos and then having the no chaining extra turns. So we haven't gotten clarification if that means copying extra turn spell or just casting multiple. Hopefully we'll get some clarity on that.
It's also been very interesting to see that it's still a few tutors, and I think that's where they're limiting to, like, if you're just tutoring a land onto the field with, say, any of the fetch lands.
They did clarify on the stream that they are not looking at any tutor that finds a land in any capacity as far as the definition of tutor in this context.
I see. Well, number 3 is where we get to the upgraded, and this is beyond the strength of an average precon deck. Still has no mass land denial. Still have the no chaining of extra turns because we're not Narset out here. We can allow some late game 2-card infinite combos, some specific high mana combos like the enchantment, that the loss of life, gain life, that one, as well as a allotment of 3 game changers.
And again, we'll get into the game changers because that's going to be a big part of it here. This is kind of becoming the new 7, as we used to joke, everything's a 7, but we're actually having more finite restrictions on this power level versus everything kind of being lumped in, which I think is good. But then we'll move on to our next category.
So next is number 4 at Optimized. High power commander, it's time to go wild with no restrictions other than the ban list. So wild, wild west.
And I'll kind of loop this in with number 5 as well, which is CDH, which is the high power, the very competitive metagame and focused mindset. The difference between the two is Optimized is still built for the casual environment, where CEH is built specifically kind of in a league of its own and is built for tournament and meta play.
It was very much a metagame focused mindset.
Victory in the quickest and most efficient way possible rather than maybe some good stuff.
Which I think this is a huge win for CDH to kind of get their own power level capacity and then not getting a chance to be cut off. Because the difference between the two, I think it's that line gets blurred a decent amount where if someone's playing like a combo, it's considered a CDH thing where that's not necessarily the case.
And it's just now a range of 4 to 5, which then we can start to do a little bit more debate on what qualifies as a 4 versus what qualifies as a 5.
And we don't have to have the argument between the two versions of high power. It's just high power or CDH.
Looking at this as well, what's going to go ahead and jump into the game changers. Over kind of a high level game changer, these are incredibly powerful cards that would require some additional conversation. It should also be noted that this is, according to Gavin, this is considered their quote unquote watch list. So if something is going to get banned from Commander moving forward, it's going to be off of this list. It's not going to come out of the blue anymore.
Specifically, we can run through them right now. Our whites are Drannith Magistrate, Enlightened Tutor, Sarah's Sanctum, Smothering Tithe, Trouble in Pairs.
Our blue list is going to be Cyclonic Rift, Expropriate, Force of Will, Fierce Guardianship, Rhystic Study, Thassa's Oracle, Urza Hardlord Artificer, Mystical Tutor, and Jin Cataxis Core Augur.
Our black comes in with Bolas' Citadel, Demonic Tutor, Imperial Seal, Opposition Agent, Turgid, God of Fright, Vampiric Tutor, and Ad Nauseam.
Red is Jeska's Will and Underworld Breach, so very small. Green will also have Survival of the Fittest, Vorinclex Voice of Hunger, and Gaia's Cradle.
Multicolor is going to have Kinnan, Bonder Prodigy, Yuriko, the Tiger's Shadow, Winota, Joiner of Forces, Grand Arbiter Augustin IV.
Get wrecked, Levi.
And finally, we have our color section, which is Ancient Tomb, Chrome Mox, the One Ring, the Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale, Trinisphere, Grim Monolith, Lion's Eye Diamond, Mox Diamond, Mana Vault, and Glacial Chasm.
All of these make a whole bunch of sense, and we can probably have the list stay on the screen as we're discussing them. They're just the strongest cards in the format at this current point in time. Maybe missing a few, but these were the identified from the commander table.
I'm okay with this list, but I do want them to expand on it.
I think they definitely will. There's a couple of different exceptions. It's interesting seeing that we had Enlightened Tutor, but not Worldly Tutor on this list.
Which, at least to me, it makes sense because Worldly Tutor doesn't get a lot of the big combo pieces, especially when we look at the color list where Enlightened Tutor can just go get the One Ring, which is one of the biggest ones. Worldly Tutor, looking at this list, you would likely only be getting Vorinclex, Jin-Gitaxias, because those are usually within the 99. Every other creature on this list, other than Thassa's Oracle, is usually going to be a commander.
I do like seeing in the color spectrum of green that they put Gaia's Cradle, the land, as an option on the list. I would like to possibly see Urborg or Cabal Coffers be considered being put on this list, but that's a big ask and not necessarily noteworthy.
And especially because at least those two aren't necessarily the big ones. Those usually are left for like infinite late game stuff.
I think one thing to note here, if you're just looking at the list as a whole, maybe some of the exceptions are some of the commanders that they're putting on there is you can't build this in a casual capacity, similar to like Urza's on here, Grand Arbiter Augustin, Yuriko, Kinnan, CDH level kind of commanders that you're ever going to do using those, it's up to no good. A lot of these cards on this list are just ubiquitously good. One thing you can see here, Mox Amber and Mox Opal were omitted from this list because they require a little bit more work. They're strong cards, but they're not just coming swinging out of the gate, unless you're using a 0-mana commander like Rograk to get Mox Amber online automatically.
And especially with Kinnan Bonder Prodigy, which is really hard to be at a very casual level.
I would have been shocked, but I would have liked to have seen Slicer on this list as well. One of those hard to play lower power. Not necessarily all encompassing, but still, I would say should be on this list.
I'd say it's a coin flip at that point because there is at least a fun way that people are just having fun with Slicer, even if it can come out, because at that point, you're building Slicer without a lot of the ramp pieces.
But then again, on the Twitch stream, they talked about this. They wanted to keep it as small as possible for now, getting a sample size. They are intending to add things on. They've even all but committed to taking some items off of the ban list and putting them into the Game Changers.
If we could get some of these lands back, I would be less salty about some of these lands.
Coalition victory, baby!
It very well might come back. You have this option now of being able to determine how many Game Changers. So if you look back on the list here, the upgrade, you get 3. So you could have a casual deck that's still going to run Smothering Tithe, Rhystic Study, and maybe you throw in like a Bolas' Citadel or a Demonic Tutor or something. So you can add some power, but it mitigates the extent that you can put into it before it starts going to the next tier.
And there's always the possibility that, as they said, they're not committed to any specific number. They could even expand this back to the 10 power scale and have different levels of Game Changers throughout there as well.
It's going to be very interesting to move forward. I do like the Game Changers, and we'll talk about this in a greater detail later on. We might even wait. They're talking about announcing something a bit more of a finalized version here in April. So we might wait for the more of the final version, just kind of getting our initial reaction here. But I think that this will really help kind of define things. Most decks are going to run into being a 3. It'll be interesting for a lot of brewers here that maybe we're on the cusp of, I can add some more power and still stay in my power bracket and kind of look to upgrade your deck a little bit to stay in the bracket. Or maybe you're just too far above and say, okay, I need to commit and make this thing stronger, or I need to scale it back. I think it'll be very interesting.
I also think that they'll probably change the amount of Game Changers as this goes on between 2, 3, and 4. So it can like really be hammered home.
I also think if they're going to commit to this where they adjust it and it's going to stay the 5, we could possibly see more content for things like conventions where, hey, we're doing another tournament, but this is for 3s only. And this kind of list is way easier to just be like, yep. You don't have this, and here are your 3 changers. Cool.
And at that point, I can only say rip in peace the signs that said casual, high power, and CDH. That is now going to be replaced by 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
I think that's totally fine. I think it's a little bit harder to get a 1 deck out in the open. I feel like you almost have to be a more veteran player to know how to build below the power level of a precon. Overall, this will help a lot more with the transparency, adding in additional things you can talk about in pregame. And obviously, if you have a play group that you play all the time together, this really doesn't apply to you. This is just kind of you're playing at your local game store, convention with some new friends until you can get it just kind of a basis for where everyone's at. And it also, I think the biggest win here is it puts on the radar cards that might get banned. So now we know these are on your quote unquote watch list. So there's not going to be the 4 cards getting banned out of the blue that causes massive turmoil.
Absolutely a wonderful idea to have the prerequisite to the immediate ban list. And also it makes some of the old deck building challenges, like building one in every power level, more fun because having a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is easier than 1 through 10. Yeah. Way less decks. Definitely a more feasible challenge to bring some more interesting ideas to meets and such. So hopefully we can see more of that.
It also takes out the guesswork of the number system as well, because that was one of the primary things that people had issues with. Every deck is a 7, or I believe my play group is pretty powerful, so I'm going to play this when you said high power. Oh, I didn't know we were playing CDH.
And I think the longer we go, we'll get that more clarity on that, especially we're getting more information from tournament deck lists of what a CDH deck actually is versus just I beat everyone back home with my Voltron deck. That's a CDH deck, right?
And at some point, there might also be adding in just specific archetypes when it comes to this, because there are specific archetypes that can fall within certain categories. If you're playing a combo deck, you're probably going to be in a 4 and a 5. If you're playing Voltron, that's probably going to be closer to the 1 and 2, maybe a 3, depending on the commander.
I also like that we're getting a slight bit more definition. I'd like to see more definition on the 1s, the 2s, the 3s, and hopefully something in 4. Because if you can list like, hey, 1s do not have these things, easy to be like, hey, I brought a 1. They know not to expect something ridiculous that they're not looking for, like turns or such.
Getting some more defined definitions on some of these things. What exactly are we calling chaining extra turns? Is that just recurring the same extra turn over and over and going infinite? When we have few tutors, is that we're talking like 1 or 2, 3? Getting some more defined definitions here, I think, would be helpful.
Yeah, and usually few means between 5 and 7 is usually the number range for a few as far as the word's concerned. And it also does depend on what kind of tutors, because if it's all demonic tutors, of course it's going to be in a stronger bracket because you get to go and get any card in your deck, versus if you had an enlightened tutor and then maybe an idyllic tutor, that's not necessarily going to be the strongest deck.
Or, you have your fabricate or something. It's 3 mana, you get an artifact, everyone knows what you're getting, so that can kind of hurt you because everyone, if you're going to go get the 1 ring, you need to have 7 mana to get it on the field right away, or you're forecasting what you're going to do at a future turn, and that might cause some extra attention.
And as much as they probably don't want to or don't think about it, I would love to see more attention brought to detail of what a 1 could be, like more bullet points on things that are not in a 1. So you could actually really deck tech that out and bring 1s to conventions and have fun. Because it might not be everyone's cup of tea, but I think it would be interesting.
I think at that point, a battle cruiser definitely falls into a 1. It's typically not going to end games as fast as usual precons or even the upgraded decks.
It'll be interesting too, because there are certain archetypes and strategies that can vary depending on the power level. For example, if I cast a Bribery, which steals a creature out of an opponent's deck, puts it into play, if I'm going against a bunch of precons, it's not super great, but if I'm going to a higher power level, that could win me the game on the spot.
Good.
Totally. But I would like to see more definition just so that way we could see what the high end of a 1 could be in a more it feels like a more restricted deck building archetype. It makes it more interesting for builders.
And then just one final note here. One thing they brought up a lot on the Twitch was just player discretion. I have a couple decks that are stronger. They're technically falling in the category 2, but if I was going to play them against precons, they would probably win pretty consistently. So knowing that I need to move it up to 3. So the way they said it, quote unquote, was you can bump something up, you just can't bump it down. I think that's a good parameter to go off of. This is just kind of a general guideline. It's going to take you as just kind of being an honest individual to know kind of where your deck is comparing. If you're blowing everyone out of the water on 2s, you probably need to move that up to 3.
And always keep in mind, like we said at the beginning, and as we are going to continue to state, this is the beta. It's going to probably get way more refined. I certainly need it to be more refined. It's going to develop, guys. So if you run into weirdness, just work it out.
Be excellent to each other. Don't take everything too seriously. And this will change. It's a beta.
Overall, though, I think it's a great start. I was a little nervous when they first announced it. I thought they were going to try to give every card in existence a number. This seems a lot more relaxed. But overall, I'll give it a initial cautious thumbs up.
I will give it a caution middle thumb. I need it to be better.
I'll go with the diagonal thumb at that point.
Just creating your own categories. All right.
I'm sorry.
Fine.
You
I give
got
it
that
dumb
nice
thumb.
little arc with the thumb. That's how that works.
All
Yeah.
right. This has been the Thought Vessel. We just wanted to get this information out to you so you're aware of kind of what went on. We might go into depth this in a little bit down the road, kind of longer. This is just kind of more information only. Anyone have any final thoughts before we go?
If you guys want us to talk more about it specifically, then we can try and make it the next episode. Give us a holler, give us a shout, reach to us on Blue Sky, Twitter, whatever you want, and let us know if we need to dive more into it.
Or in the comments.
Coalition victory is a game changer, baby!
So proud of you.
That is all the time we have. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.
Take care.
Bye.